Volume 3 Chapter 8. It's still a lot to put on me all at once on the very day we've met. Crush, Lulu said in a bit of a tiff. I'll skip the mud for now. But if we survive this, on the way back I will. I will permit it. The happy thudding of Zariasu's tail on Rororo's back was impossible to miss. I'm sorry. But I am still a male, and the idea excites me. Zariasu acknowledged and moved his hands so that they were beside her long, slender body and holding on to the necks of two of Rororo's heads. Yes, I understand. My tribe is not large. I know what it is you're feeling, at least by observation. Crush replied. Now who's the pervert? Zariasu joked and she gasped, scandalized. It's not like that, Crush exclaimed, and blushed when he laughed at her. I know, but the humans have a saying, turnabout is fair play, and you put me on the spot first. Zariasu replied without any taunting or meanness to his words. I suppose I did do that. Crush admitted succinctly. We should be there soon, Zariasu said, allowing the subject to shift and pointing to a distant wall of earth and logs. It was barely a dot ahead, but he saw it clearly. You mention humans, you were a traveler? Crush asked. Yes, I bear the brand of my tribe to mark me as such. I left and wandered the realms of men for several years. Zariasu replied. Why? Crush asked, looking up over her shoulder at him. He wasn't looking down at her now, his mind was elsewhere, eyes focused forward. Why? Zariasu reversed the question. Yes, unless your customs differ from ours, that brand meant you would no longer be able to participate in governing the tribe, you would be forever apart from your own people. That is a very heavy burden, and besides that there was the very big risk that you might die out there. You could have been enslaved, or killed by humans, or a monster, or any number of dreadful ends. I could also die in our next tribal wars. Zariasu answered in a voice as cold as frost pane. I left because I knew things couldn't stay the same. Sooner or later we would be hungry again, sooner or later we would have to fight each other again. What if the hunger is greater next time? How will we survive? We still might not, we still have not recovered from the wars amongst one another, and now the frogmen threaten to destroy us. Zariasu replied with his entire body tensing in frustration and anger. The world outside our lake and our swamp. I thought it might have answers. Knowledge that might help us to change our fates. I was right, I found things that, if we had known them years ago, would have meant none of us would go hungry. If someone had gone before me, none of that might have happened. Zariasu's jaw tightened and his mouth audibly snapped shut. Yes, I understand. What if we fail, but are we able to leave? Crush asked. Will your knowledge help us? Maybe. I made human friends in the kingdom among the adventurers. The kingdom is safer than the theocracy. I was warned never to go there or I would be killed. Baharuth to the north is far too great a distance. We'd have to travel far to get around the area ruled by frogmen. We aren't well suited to the caves of the dwarves, though they are friendly enough. Anywhere we go, living will be hard and anything might go wrong. Our old likely would not survive such a journey. That is true, Crush said, and then her blood froze when Zariasu spoke again. I noticed you had very few elders compared to us. Why? Zariasu asked. Crush wasn't sure if his tone actually held suspicion in it or if it was all in her own imagination, but she chose to answer honestly. Our lives depend on one another. I have no choice but to trust this one. Crush reasoned, and putting her hands on the outside of his own, she answered, it is how we avoided fighting in the war at all. I don't understand, did they find a dangerous food supply and risk themselves to bring it back? Zariasu asked, could stronger ones make it? If so, perhaps we could harvest something worthwhile before fleeing if we have to. No, nothing like that. That would make this easier. When the tribes went to war, our chief, he didn't want to risk joining any side. So he made laws. Laws with stiff penalties, Crush said and searched vainly for the words to carry on with her explanation. Laws, how do laws help feed you? You can't eat laws. Zariasu pointed out, and she lowered her head a little, watching the ground vanish slowly under Rororo's tireless round feet. The squelching mud and the breeze were tranquil to hear and to feel for a moment, but only for a moment. She felt another burn from on her pale scales. The pain gnawed at her a little before she answered. No, we don't eat the laws. We didn't, I mean. But whenever someone broke a rule, our chief would exile them. He would escort them out of the village, far out of sight, and then when he returned, he brought back meat to feed the tribe with. Nobody knew what he was doing, not at first. He almost always chose the aged ones for punishment. Eventually we did figure it out. But we pretended we didn't. Crush tightened her hold over his hands. We pretended we weren't guilty for what felt like the longest time while the other tribes fought each other. We were showing our shameful selves and pretending we didn't know that we were eating the bodies of our elders. How hypocritical we were. It wasn't until the famine was near the end, when we knew, we were sure that we were safe, that we turned on our chief. Only when we were safe, did we put the blame on him and start our own war against each other. I led the way. I rallied the village, and I killed him. He saved us, at a terrible price, and took all that guilt on himself so that we could go on. And I killed him for it. I see. I don't know what to say to that. Zariasu answered, inching closer as if to offer his warmth. The strange thing though, he seemed at peace. My staff came up, and he bowed his head to me to accept the blow. He offered no real resistance, only a token of his true ability, and so I took his life with ease. I never knew your chief, but can I offer an explanation? Zariasu asked as kindly as his rough voice would allow. She nodded with quiet acceptance and awaited his condemnation. I think he knew his tribe would survive. You took the role of chief after him, the tribe was in good hands, and it was over. And because he accepted all the guilt, the tribe could go on as it had without despising itself. I don't know the character of your chief, but if my brother were in his place, I think that would have been his thought, Zariasu said with pride. Crush Lulu's tail drooped, a heavy weight seemed to have fallen away, and without even thinking about it, she let herself lean back into the body of the large male behind her. Thank you for that. I think maybe you're right, looking at it that way, it does sound like him, he was a truly great leader. He must have been. Now here you are doing the same, putting your life on the line to lead them as he did before you. It is hard to be chief. I don't even envy you, and I do not even envy my brother. Zariasu gave a vigorous shake of his head. Strangely enough, not being part of the governing life of the tribe was not a bad thing to think about when I considered becoming a traveler. After the war, when things settled, I didn't dislike the idea of not participating in a decision to kill our own ever again. Any risks I took risked only myself. That seemed a little enough thing to handle. You say that, but yourself is all you've got. Crush Lulu replied, and then raised her hand and pointed ahead. The matter was dropped in an instant. They've spotted us. Zariasu looked closely. She was right. The solid wall was giving way to a view of the interior as the gate opened up in front of them and guards at the top held long spears at the ready, their numbers quickly increasing as others rushed up from the inside, ready to fend off the monster Rororo and whoever was riding him. If they attack, I will turn Rororo around. He will take you back, warn our tribes that we failed and to run to the Adventurers Guild of Riastais and ask for help. Ask from Knack of Rainbow. Zariasu's instructions were swift and given without regard for whether Crush would agree with them or not. You're going to risk yourself again? Crush demanded to know. I have only myself. I am a traveler. I can be lost. But I'm also the bearer of Frost Pain. They may not attack, but if they do, by using Frost Pain's power, I can buy time for you to escape, Zariasu said, and sensing her hesitation he raised his head and spoke to his companion. Rororo, if they attack, take my friend back, even if you have to carry her in your mouths, Zariasu commanded, and Rororo nodded as if he understood. You can't make that decision for me. Crush Lulu exclaimed. Someone has to survive, and you are a chief, Zariasu said in the bluntest way he could. Crush Lulu could not argue with his reasoning, and launched no more objections as they came close enough to see into the eyes of the lizardman on the wall. Volume 3 Chapter 9. Zanbaru was a lot of things, but easily surprised wasn't among them. But when the guards atop the wall shouted that there was a monster coming, and it was carrying 2 lizardmen, he was very much surprised. Open the gate, I'll go out and speak with them. Zanbaru barked the order and the little wooden gate made a loud creaking noise as the entrance split open and out he came. As the largest of the Dragon Tusk tribe, he was also the strongest, and their greatest warrior. It was because he had the confidence of the strong that he thought nothing about swaggering outside the security of the gate to speak to their unexpected visitors. He waited, open-handed and open-armed, as the Hydra and its riders came closer. I am Zanbaru Gugu of the Dragon Tusk tribe. Who are you and why are you here? It was a blunt question from a blunt chief. It set the tone that Zariasu favored abundantly. He hopped down from Rororo, then reaching up with one hand, he helped Crush down so lightly that her feet made no sound when they hit a puddle on the ground. "I am Zariasu Shasha of the Green Claw tribe," he said, and reaching over his shoulder, he removed Frostpain and held it overhead, bearer of Frostpain. He then replaced the weapon a moment later after ensuring that the others heard and saw him, not just Sanbaru Gugu. "This," he put a hand on her back, "is Crush Lulu of the Red Eye tribe. We come with important news that affects all lizardmen." This had the desired effect. He saw the Waysum tensed, fearing an alliance of tribes was ready to turn on them. Sanbaru, however, proved his mettle. He did not tense, nor flinch, nor did he show any hint of concern about the possibility. "What is this news?" Sanbaru asked and crossed his arms in front of his broad and powerful chest. "Frogmen, the frogmen have mustered." "How many?" Zariasu asked, looking down at Crush Lulu. "Too many. We can't beat them alone, none of us can. We need to join together. I've seen their numbers, they are far more than we can hope to fight," Crush said and bent forward with a slight bow of her head, her hands pointed toward the ground. "They want to kill us all. All lizardmen, all are old, are young, everyone." "The frogmen?" Sanbaru looked over his shoulder, not thinking of the village at his back but rather at the distant frogmen. "They've been fighting the Baharuth Empire for years. Why would they come against us? How would they send so many against us? Humans may not be stronger than us man to man, but they have good weapons, good armor, and there are a lot of them." It was then that Zariasu took note of the mark of the traveler on the bare-scarred chest of the deep green scale chief. Clad in only the usual long brown loincloth and a necklace with monster teeth to show his status, the figure himself was so impressive it was easy to overlook the mark. But there it was. "You traveled to Baharuth, didn't you?" Zariasu asked. "Before my time as chief, yes. The Empire always kept many thousands on the outskirts of the frogmen's territory and they fought often. The frogmen are fierce but they don't do well away from the lake or the swamp for long. They raided a lot of villages, but that is all." Sanbaru's words were more thoughtful than Zariasu had first expected out of the mountain of a lizard man. "But that is a traveler for you. He thinks, he doesn't just fight. He is more than a brute." Zariasu mentally breathed a sigh of relief. "Your woman?" he asked, pointing at Crush Lulu, "has an unusual look, not a warrior look." "I am a druid, but I have fought. I killed the frogman leader's brother before our village escaped." Crush blushed a little at the assumption that she was bound to Zariasu, but didn't deny it. "I see. And how many? How many exactly did you see?" Sanbaru demanded. "At least 20 entire pre-war villages worth. And that is only what I saw. The frogmen can hide beneath the water, so there might have been more. They're led by a female named Hiketi. She is very, very large." Sanbaru sucked in air at the scale she named. "That is many. But what do you plan to do?" "Gather all the tribes together to fight them. And if we can't fight, to gather us all together to flee. We can survive outside of the lake and the swamp, they can't," Crush Lulu pointed out. "My brother rules the Green Claw tribe. He plans on raiding the frogmen, finding out what's driving them. If there's a threat behind them, perhaps we could unite, but if not, at least we will learn something. How many they have, how they will fight, where they will go. But no matter what we learn, we must all work together," Zariasu replied. "You're asking a lot from us," Sanbaru said and waved one massive arm back toward the village. "The survivors of 2 defeated tribes joined with us, and they have not forgotten Green Claw. They'll remember nothing when they're dead," Zariasu said with cold calculation. "Yes. Perhaps you're right, but this is Dragon Tusk. If you want us to work with you, then you must prove your strength." Sanbaru brought his massive right arm up in front of himself and made a fist. "Fight me. Fight me and I will work with you," Sanbaru demanded. Shasharyu Shasha jogged through the pathless forest. At his back were 7 of his own volunteers who had offered to risk themselves on a mission which he would not pass to his brother. "Zariasu," he thought, "forgive me for not waiting on you, but I knew you'd want to do this yourself, and I don't want to risk you again." It was hypocritical and he knew it. He brushed aside a branch, ignoring the droplets of water that washed over his scales. He and those with him were all blending into the foliage. The surrounding bushes and trees were their best hope for hiding themselves, as the frogmen naturally preferred to stay by the water's edge. It was a circuitous route to say the least, and exhausting. Here, he said, when the sun began its decline in the sky and shadows began to deepen even within the already shrouded forest. Strong limbs and strong claws dug into bark, and up the trees they went, limb over limb, until they found thick branches and thick brush to hide themselves. The sense of smell of the frogman was a mild concern, but as the wind caressed Shazharyu's face, much of that concern melted. Assuming the females spoke the truth, then we're downwind from any frogman, a few hours sleep, that's all we need, and we should reach whatever is left of the Red-Eye tribal village. He shifted with discomfort even after wrapping his tail around the trunk of the tree that he set at his back. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and lowered his head after closing his eyes. Is she telling the truth? I want to believe it's all a lie. I want to believe the threat isn't as great as they say. But they came all together, and that makes it hard to doubt. He began to force his breathing to slow down. Worry would keep sleep at bay. A racing heart was a tense one. Steady, you'll know tomorrow. That was a somewhat comforting thought. Catch them early, kidnap one, and buy time for the rest of our people to rally. It was foolish, it was bold, it was dangerous. It's exactly what we need. And if it's true, then two chiefs' words are better than one. Shazharyu yawned, baring sharp teeth to the dark shadows. The noises of the forest continued as they always had, a quiet rhythm of chaos, the occasional roar, the scream of bats emerging from some hidden cave out of view, the cries of a dying beast thrashing around in mud or water, and the crunch of bones under the assault of terrible teeth. None of it disturbed the natives of the Great Lake. It was just as it had always been. Life and death, wakefulness and slumber, both. All existed side by side and always had. The only thing to disturb him at all was the prospect that the tribe itself might end. To lose one, even a brother, is acceptable. As long as we don't lose it all. If we lose it all, then what's the point? He wondered, yawned, and finally fell into a longed-for dreamless sleep. Volume 3 Chapter 10. Shazharyu's rest was filled with tossing and turning, the warmth of the night air over his scales and the rough feel of the bark that his tail clung to. None of that was a problem. But what troubled him most in the tumult of his dreams were nightmares. Nightmares of the burning hunger and the war that went with it. Even now, confronted by the real danger of the frogman tribes that dominated most of the northern area of the lake, the past remained in the ever-present moments of his mind at rest. Fire licking at the sky, the broken walls of a village of lizardmen, crackle, 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 the noise the fires made, and there was always fire in war, even beside the lake. He awoke with his eyes flying open, his chest pounding with the echoed scream of a lizardman on fire beside a child with its head bashed in and blood seeping out to turn already moist ground into dark, ugly mud. When awareness returned to the tribal chief, he still didn't fully leave the nightmare behind. How many of us died? We can't ever let that happen again. How strong would we be against the frogmen if we had all those lost lives back? It was the sort of question you asked, knowing you'd never get an answer. Shazharyu then relaxed the hold of his tail on the tree and scrambled down a few limbs distance before he released the hold of his claws on the bark and pushed off in a hop to land at the base again. The grass barely made a sound, a mere whish noise when he hit the soft ground in which it grew. He then went from one tree to the next and knocked his fist against it to wake his sleeping warriors. The sun wasn't yet up, and if what he knew of the fragment held true, we can catch them off their guard. It was a desperate hope, but it wasn't an improbable one. Each in turn his fellow lizardmen descended from their places in the trees and then raced after their chief on short, swift-moving legs. They skittered forward through shadow and darkness, not content with the darkness before the dawn. They hid amidst the brushes, behind trees, and avoided any indication of regular activity by any intelligent being, even if that sign was so much as a single lone camp or a cut log. Shazharyu's forethought about where to sleep and how, paid off quickly. Within another hour's travel they were on the outskirts of Crush Lulu's village. What was left of it? The walls were toppled, some in whole, some in part or broken into splinters. The huts he could see through the gaps were fallen heaps with little more than their raised foundations remaining. In the center of what had been the village, a massive frogwoman stood with her back to Shazharyu and his warriors. Arrayed in a curved pattern at her front and side were the frogman warriors she was speaking to. Part of the lizardman chief knew he should have been concerned with what she was saying. But something else drew his focus. There were two battered and bloody lizardmen bound to stakes nearby, their arms were broken, and they were obviously in pain. They sat barely stirring with their legs out on the dirt while a guard stood by holding a long wicked-looking spear with a single jagged-toothed edge. Others bore spears with a similar look to them, but the number of teeth secured to the sharp edge varied, with the largest number being held in the towering body of the frogman chief. Teeth on their spears might denote rank. Shaziryu considered the possibility and filed it away for later. He raised his hand and moved it in a half-moon shape. Avoid being picked up by the wind. They were skilled hunters, they would understand, he reassured himself, and they began to move, only the smallest rustles giving away their presence as they searched the perimeter of the fallen village for their prey. Shaziryu found it right enough, a frogman standing on his two long, powerful legs with one wart-covered green slimy webbed hand holding the center of a spear. The other folded behind his back, his big round throat bulge expanding and contracting with every breath. How can there be so many? These have got to be the ugliest creatures in the world, Shaziryu thought. The frogman was clearly unaware of their presence as they drew closer, closer, and closer. Inch by inch within the dense foliage they made to position themselves. Shaziryu then, crouching in position, pointed to each one of his warriors in turn and then tapped a part of his own body. You hit there, you hit that, you hit. So he commanded without a word, and they nodded in common obedience to the guidance of their chief. Then they were popping up to their feet as one, a single rustling of the bushes and their clubs were brought back, then hurled forward end over end. The frogman warrior had only a moment or two of blank incomprehension. One moment he was staring into the shadows, the next at the shapes of lizardmen who sprang up from the ground like they'd been planted there. His big wide mouth opened to call out for help, then the pain hit. A blow to each of his knees, a blow to each of his elbows, then he felt a pain in his temple, and then nothing. Finally he knew only darkness. Take him, Shaziryu whispered to his warriors and they scrambled to obey, rushing over the space to snatch the unconscious figure and retrieve their weapons. To take him back. The rest, we leave a false trail, they will pursue their own. Carry it over your shoulders. Shaziryu gave the orders before they'd even finished binding the broken limbs and binding the big mouth of the frogman guard. Get back safe, I will meet you at our village when I've laid a false trail. Chief. You have. Shaziryu shook his head, other than my brother, I'm the best at this, the rest will come with me to lay the trail, you too, he pointed to the lizardman binding the captive, take him back now. No more time remains, get that one back and find out what he knows, and pray to our ancestors that it isn't too late, he hissed so harshly that his tongue slipped out and wiggled for an instant. The rest of his little band snapped their jaws shut, and then they broke apart, going in two different directions. Shaziryu let his eyes linger for a moment on the withdrawing pair. They held the frogman under arms and legs, and they weren't very cautious about it. He winced. I don't envy that one when he wakes up. They vanished into the foliage and then he pointed to the other four. Now, we lay a false trail, break twigs, but not many, press 1 foot heavier into the softer places on the ground, but rarely. They will chase us. And possibly, just possibly, their confusion will keep them off the other villages for a while. It was a bold hope, perhaps a mad hope, but it was the only one Shaziryu had at the moment. So the albino female wasn't lying. How many were there? A dozen of our villages worth? 2? And those were all warriors. We may need help. Help and time. Lots of both, even. The chief of the Green Claw tribe swallowed hard, and the 4 of them vanished into the shadows where they would become bait for Hiketi and her frogmen.